So good morning again and welcome. This is not only our Dharma Sunday class, but the conclusion of a retreat on impermanence. And it's been wonderful to look at our minds, our environment, our world, especially right in this moment through the lens of impermanence. So we just concluded saying the Bodhisattva prayer. And I want to begin with this poem that relates our bodhisattva intention to the moment, the historic moment that we're all working with together. And this is from the book, The First Free Women, and it's the poem by Punika the Slave. So many of the early nuns left very difficult circumstances to join the Sangha. In the early morning, well before dawn, I would go down to the river. It was my job to carry water up the hill to my master's house. Of course, we all want to be free, but what good is freedom when your sisters remain slaves? I used to imagine an old man down there by the river. I used to imagine what I would say to him. What does it mean to own another human being? What does it mean to feel your own skin, to touch it and know that you are not free? We all have bodies. My sisters, I don't have to tell you. But where did I get this body? Who made me a slave? The old man and me standing there watching the river, waiting. But for what? Over the years, this round heart has been pounded flat. Sometimes it doesn't feel safe to feel anything at all. Don't give up, my sisters. Whatever you have to say, now is the time to say it loud. All our dreams of the past, all our dreams of what will be, come, reach out your hand. Some rivers we must cross together. So here we are, crossing the river together. I want to go back to Shantideva, who we've been studying these past weeks, and recite some of his beautiful poetry. All the world contains, all the joy the world contains has come through wishing happiness for others. All the misery the world contains has come through wanting pleasure for oneself. Since I and other beings both, in wanting happiness, are equal and alike, what difference is there to distinguish us that I should strive to have my bliss alone? Strive at first to meditate upon the sameness of yourself and others. In joy and sorrow, all are equal. Thus be a guardian of all as of yourself. Hands and limbs are thought of as members of a body. Shall we not consider others likewise, limbs and members of a living whole? Seeing then the faults that come from cherishing myself, the oceanic qualities that come from loving others, I shall lay aside all love of self and gain the habit of adopting others. So these verses express the essence of what we're doing on our Sunday Dharma practice together. As community, as Sangha, we are crossing the river together, looking at the hardness of our heart and learning how to widen and soften, as a new friend just expressed to me, widen and soften. And I find it very interesting that in these challenging times, what we're studying together is the practice of sending and taking. It's not an easy practice, and it's not a simple or simplistic practice, but it is quite an extraordinary practice for right now, because it's the practice of learning how to become undefended, how to hear the cries of all the different kinds of beings who are suffering, to really see when our walls go up and how to take these walls down one brick at a time so that we can really enter the world of suffering undefended and really listening. The quality of Tara, the activity of compassion, the great female goddess in Buddhism, has her foot springing off the cushion so she can enter the world. So our practice isn't to sit at home and feel better. Our practice is to spring into the world with wisdom, to invite all of our brothers and sisters to cross the river together. So last week we went through the Tonglen practice in a fairly complex way. And so today we're going to return to a very simple way and look at it piece by piece and how we can use it essentially to open our eyes and widen and soften our hearts. It's 4 stages, and we'll go through each of the 4 stages slowly and carefully. The first stage is to touch base with your relaxed, generous, spacious mind. To remind you that you have access to it all the time, that it's something that you can train in touching base with ever more deeply, ever more expansively. The second stage is to just experience for ourselves in our body and in our mind what is the very human response to discomfort. So when we say we want to listen to the cries of the world, we want to be open to the suffering of the world, we're faced with the human mind wanting to shut down, wall off, contract at the very simplest touching of discomfort. There was a study a long, long time ago that said if you put a needle near an amoeba, the amoeba would move away. So even in a cellular way, without thinking of it, we have the aspiration to hear the cries of the world, and we want in an cellular primitive response instinctually wanting to move away from the suffering of the world. So then step by step we say, okay, how do we teach ourselves bravery? How do we teach ourselves courage? The third step is reminding ourselves that we actually are brave and we have been brave, and we can look at how our minds are when we are brave. And the fourth step is to say, all right, with the confidence that my mind actually is open and spacious, and with the confidence that I actually have been brave, how can I widen and soften a little bit more today to the vast suffering in the world? So those are the 4 steps, and we'll go through each one at a time, remembering that at any moment, if you feel overwhelmed, just sit and relax your mind right there in whatever way is comfortable for you, knowing that just like all of us, you are human, I'm human, and some days this is as far as we can go. All right, so how do we relax our minds and touch base with that spaciousness? First, we have to see how much is going on in our minds. And so we give ourselves an object to concentrate on. Most often it's our breath, but you can also use an object, even a stone or a pencil, just something simple. And we anchor our mind to that object, and we let all the extraneous chatter, all the worries, the concerns, the memories, the doubt, the good feelings, the bad feelings, we let them all settle and just pay attention to that object. So we're going to start right there, noticing that as we focus on an object, all the external chatter can drop off, even if it's just for a moment. And every time our mind drifts from that concentration, we just gently remind ourselves back to the object, like a feather tapping on our shoulder with kindness and friendliness There's nothing wrong with your mind. We're just going back to the object. This is the nature of human minds. As I ring the bell, rest in the stillness and just take in the flavor of less chatter. How much more spacious your mind feels and how good that feels. Okay, the second stage is like that amoeba experiment I was telling you about. When we look out, we can see how difficult change is, how hearted people can be. And it's much more difficult to see how hard our own hearts are, how difficult it is for us to change. So, if the cellular response, if the human response is to move away from discomfort, if that's why all of our hearts are so hard in the face of the suffering of the world, let's look at that. So, at this stage, all we're doing is imagining that there is something uncomfortable in the air as we breathe in and we breathe out. You have to figure out what's uncomfortable for you. If it were smoky, if there was an odor in the air, if it were dusty. What is it like to imagine that it's just slightly uncomfortable to breathe? And remember, this is just in our imagination, so it's not even real. And notice your response if you're only imagining that the air is slightly difficult or uncomfortable. Notice the desire to not let the breath in, the desire to hold your breath, the desire to resist and shut down. And every time you see that reaction and response, soften right in that moment and relax, and then try it again. So we're training ourselves to have a different response to discomfort by seeing the human cellular response and relaxing right there in a very simple way. So, having tasted spaciousness, having seen your defense mechanism clearly and softening, now we're going to remind ourselves that there have been many, many times when we have managed to be brave. So, I'm going to invite you to recall a situation, and don't worry if you can't find something exact. But what we're going to do is um, imagine a scenario in which you were able to keep your heart open. So imagine a family member, someone dear to you, is coming to you crying. And instead of being overwhelmed, you are able to sit and listen and be open. Or if in the context of the world right now, you're able to watch a documentary or the news, and instead of responding with overwhelm this minute, you're able to soften and be open. Maybe it's just an image or a picture. But instead of the uh, walls going up, instead of the overwhelm shutting you down, remind yourself of a moment in which you were able to be brave. And rest with that and notice the feeling of your body and notice the state of your mind. And if you're unable to find it, just rest with that and look for it as you go through life in the coming weeks. See if you can find the moment due to your love of this person, your compassion for the situation, you choose not to put the wall up, or maybe even just to make the wall a little permeable. Maybe it's with an animal that's suffering and you choose to be with that suffering, but you're open and not closed. So, noticing that we have the capacity to really open our hearts and listen, even when it's difficult. Maybe it's only a tiny difficult situation, not a big difficult situation, but we do have that capacity. There's something about our mentality, um, you could say it's our cultural neurosis, that our response, part of the overwhelm, goes really quickly to guilt and shame. And I remember talking to Zikr Control Rinpoche, and he was saying that that is really our biggest uh, obstacle. And it's something to do about our culture that we're especially good at it. And if you look at it, guilt and shame are quite different than regret. Regret is a recognition, and it's an undefended way of seeing some sort of harm. But guilt and shame then makes it about me. I'm so bad, I'm so bad, I'm so bad. And we actually classify that as a kind of pride because it's making it all about me. So let's look at the moment where we've been able to not respond with overwhelm, but respond with openness, and then take this same situation to the larger world crisis we're experiencing right now and see what it's like to open to a little of the pain that's being expressed. Whatever crack in the door you can do today. Notice the overwhelm starting to rise up, that defensiveness. Notice the guilt and shame starting to rise up and say, oh, I can see that. I can choose that fresh, open state of mind, that relaxed state of mind. I am brave. And even if I'm only taking one tiny step more than I've done before, I'm training myself how to be brave by resting in just this little crack open today. All right. So we're looking at that situation that we were imagining, someone dear to us, and listening to them. And now we're opening that to the cries that are coming, however you want to imagine that, however specifically you want to imagine that. Seeing your heart widen and soften to whatever capacity you're able to do today, and then just resting there. We're making the situation of our bravery just a little bit bigger. Overwhelm arises, soften right there. Fear arises, soften right there. Shutting down, wanting to check out, soften right there. So thank you for stretching with me. A little more bravery every Sunday. So we have a chance now to sit and check in with each other. How are you experiencing the meditation this morning? How are you experiencing the world in this moment?
Hi, Khenmo. It's Eileen. How are you?
Good.
Speaking of guilt, I